In the darkest days of World War II, technology became the ultimate weapon. Steel giants, tanks, crushed everything in their path. Fighter planes ruled the skies with deadly precision, and then a single invention unleashed destruction the world had never seen before. This is the story of tanks, planes, and the atomic bomb that changed history forever. In the grand and often brutal theater of human history, there are moments of profound and rapid change, periods when the very pressures of survival accelerate the pace of invention at a breathtaking rate. The Second World War was, perhaps, the most intense of these crucibles. It was a conflict that engulfed the globe, a struggle not only of armies and nations, but of minds and machines. The technology of World War II did not merely assist in the fighting, it fundamentally redefined its very nature, reshaping the strategies, the battlefields, and ultimately the destiny of humankind. From the churning mud of the Eastern Front to the vast, lonely expanses of the Pacific Ocean, new and terrifyingly effective tools of war emerged. These were not simple refinements of old weapons. They were revolutionary leaps forward, the roar of a new generation of aircraft engines, the silent, deadly approach of a submarine beneath the waves, the unstoppable advance of a panzer division. These were the sounds that heralded a new era of conflict. The innovations born from this global struggle were so powerful, so transformative, that their echoes can still be felt today. In this exploration, we will journey back to that tumultuous time. We will witness how human ingenuity, spurred by the desperate necessities of war, gave birth to technologies that would not only decide the outcome of the greatest conflict in history, but would also lay the very foundations of the world we now inhabit. We will look at the machines of the land, the sea, and the air, and the ultimate weapon that brought the era to a devastating conclusion, changing the course of history forever. The Earth itself seemed to tremble. Before the Second World War, the tank was a curious, often unreliable beast. A holdover from the Great War, it was seen by many military traditionalists as a mere infantry support weapon, a slow-moving shield to help soldiers cross no man's land. But in the minds of a few visionaries, it held the potential for something far, far greater. A new doctrine was being forged, one that would use these machines not as assistants, but as the very tip of the spear. This new philosophy was called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. It required a new kind of tank. No longer would the slow, heavily armored behemoths of the past suffice. Speed, range, and communication were now paramount. The German panzer divisions, with vehicles like the Panzer III and IV, embodied this principle. They were not necessarily the most powerful tanks on the field, but they were fast, mechanically reliable, and, crucially, equipped with radios. This simple addition of a radio in every tank was a revolution in itself. It transformed a collection of individual machines into a cohesive, intelligent organism. A commander could now orchestrate complex maneuvers in real time, directing his steel fist to punch through weak points in the enemy line, to encircle and to annihilate. The Polish and French armies, still clinging to outdated doctrines, were simply overwhelmed by this coordinated ferocity. The initial shock of the Blitzkrieg sent Allied engineers scrambling. The challenge was immense, to design and mass-produce tanks that could not only match, but surpass the German panzers. The Soviet Union, with its vast industrial capacity, responded with a design of brutal, simple elegance, the T-34. Its sloped armor was a stroke of genius, causing incoming shells to deflect, effectively increasing its protection without adding prohibitive weight. The T-34 was a shock to the German forces when it first appeared on the Eastern Front. It was fast, well-armed with a powerful 76mm gun, and most importantly, it could be produced in staggering numbers. The sheer quantity of these machines, rolling relentlessly across the steppes, represented a tide of steel that the German war machine would struggle desperately to contain. It was a testament to a different kind of innovation, not just in quality, but in mass producibility. In the West, the American industrial behemoth roared to life. The M4 Sherman became the workhorse of the Allied armies. While individually often outmatched by the later, heavier German tanks like the Tiger and the Panther, the Sherman had its own crucial advantages. It was exceptionally reliable, easy to repair in the field, and like the T-34, it was produced on an almost unbelievable scale. For every German Tiger lost, a dozen Shermans could be there to take its place. The Germans, in turn, were pushed into a technological arms race. They developed the Panther, arguably one of the most balanced tank designs of the war, combining sloped armor, a high-velocity 75mm gun, and good mobility. And then there was the Tiger, a monster of a machine, its armor almost impervious to Allied guns at standard engagement ranges, and its own 88mm gun capable of destroying any opponent from afar. But these technological marvels came at a cost. They were complex, resource-intensive, and prone to mechanical failures. The very sophistication that made them so deadly on the battlefield also made them a logistical nightmare. While a Panther or Tiger could dominate a localized engagement, the war was a vast, grinding conflict of attrition, a battle of production lines as much as front lines. The battlefields became evolutionary testing grounds. Tank crews developed new tactics on the fly. The concept of the tank destroyer emerged, specialized vehicles, often turretless, designed to carry the largest possible guns to counter the heavily armored beasts roaming the battlefield. The German Jagdpanther and the American M10 were apex predators in this new ecosystem of armored warfare. The design of the tank's main armament was a constant struggle for supremacy. Muzzle velocity, caliber, and ammunition type were all furiously developed. The British introduced the 17-pounder, a gun so powerful it could finally punch through the frontal armor of a Tiger, and they rushed to fit it into their Sherman tanks, creating the potent Sherman Firefly. Ultimately, the tank transformed ground warfare from the static, attritional slog of World War I into a fluid, dynamic conflict of maneuver and encirclement. It became the decisive weapon on the ground, a symbol of industrial might and tactical innovation. The clash of these iron giants on the plains of Kursk or in the hedgerows of Normandy was the clash of entire nations' engineering prowess and strategic thought. The legacy of these designs is long-lasting. The concept of the main battle tank, a single vehicle type that balances firepower, protection, and mobility, is a direct descendant of the lessons learned in the desperate struggles of the Second World War. The roar of the tank engine, once a sound of terror, became the sound of a new form of warfare, one that continues to shape military doctrine to this very day. The sky, once a realm of birds and dreams, became a battlefield of unprecedented scale and ferocity during the Second World War. The aeroplane, a fragile novelty in the previous global conflict, had matured into a sophisticated and utterly decisive weapon of war. To control the air was to control the fate of the armies and navies below. Air superiority was not just an advantage, it was a prerequisite for victory. At the war's outset, the German Luftwaffe possessed some of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was a masterpiece of engineering, small, fast, and heavily armed. Flying in innovative formations like the Finger 4, which allowed for greater flexibility and mutual support, German pilots swept aside the older, less capable air forces of Poland and France with terrifying efficiency. The Battle of Britain became the first great turning point in the air war. Here, the Luftwaffe faced a formidable and determined opponent, the Royal Air Force. The British had two superb aircraft of their own. The Hawker Hurricane, a rugged and stable gun platform, was the workhorse of the battle, but it was the Supermarine Spitfire that would capture the world's imagination. Its graceful elliptical wings gave it superb maneuverability, a crucial edge in a dogfight. But the aircraft themselves were only part of the equation. The British had a secret weapon on the ground, the chain-home radar system. This network of coastal radar stations could detect incoming German formations from over 100 miles away. This information was fed into a highly sophisticated command and control system, allowing RAF Fighter Command to husband its resources, dispatching squadrons precisely where and when they were needed. It was a battle of information as much as of machines. As the war progressed, the pace of aeronautical development became frenetic. Engineers on all sides sought any advantage they could find. Engines became more powerful, superchargers allowed them to perform at higher altitudes, and armament grew ever more deadly. The shift from machine guns to cannons, which fired explosive shells, dramatically increased a fighter's destructive power. A single, well-placed cannon strike could tear the wing off an enemy bomber. The arrival of the United States into the war brought its own legendary aircraft to the fore. The Republic. P-47 Thunderbolt was a behemoth, huge, heavily armed, and incredibly tough. It could absorb tremendous punishment and still bring its pilot home. But it was the North American P-51 Mustang that would truly change the game. Originally designed for the British, its performance was transformed by the installation of the superb Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The Mustang was the aircraft the Allies had been dreaming of. It had the speed and agility to match the best German fighters, but crucially, it had the range. With external drop tanks, it could escort American heavy bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress, all the way to Berlin and back. This was the key that unlocked the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. No longer could the Luftwaffe's fighters rise to attack the bomber streams with impunity. The German engineers, in a desperate bid to reclaim air superiority, pushed the boundaries of technology into entirely new realms. They produced the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262. When it appeared in the skies over Europe, it was a revelation. It was hundreds of miles per hour faster than any Allied piston engine fighter. Allied pilots who encountered it could only watch, stunned, as it flew past them as if they were standing still. The Me 262 was a glimpse of the future of air combat. However, it was a classic case of too little, too late. Plagued by engine reliability problems, fuel shortages, and the constant disruption of Allied bombing, it could never be produced in sufficient numbers to have a strategic impact on the war's outcome. It was a technological marvel that arrived on a battlefield already lost. In the vast Pacific theater, the nature of the air war was different, defined by immense distances and the central role of the aircraft carrier. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 was the undisputed master of the skies in the early stages of the war. It was exceptionally lightweight and astonishingly agile, able to outturn any Allied fighter. Its long range also made it a perfect weapon for carrier operations. The shock of the Zero forced American designers to rethink their approach. Instead of trying to outmaneuver the Zero, they developed new aircraft and new tactics. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was the answer. It was not as agile as the Zero, but it was faster in a dive, much more heavily armed, and crucially far more rugged and better protected. American pilots learned to use boom and zoom tactics, using their speed advantage to make high-speed firing passes rather than engaging in turning dogfights. The Duel in the Clouds was a relentless high-stakes evolutionary contest. Every innovation was met with a counter-innovation. The development of gyroscopic gun sights improved accuracy, pressurized cockpits allowed pilots to fly higher, and the first primitive air-to-air rockets were deployed. The fighter plane had transformed from a reconnaissance tool into the ultimate arbiter of the sky, a sleek, deadly predator upon which the entire course of the war depended. Beneath the waves, in the cold, crushing darkness of the ocean depths, another war was being waged. It was a silent, clandestine, and utterly vital conflict. The submarine, or U-boat as it was known in Germany, was a weapon of stealth and strangulation. It aimed not at armies, but at the economic lifelines of nations. For an island nation like Britain, completely dependent on imports for its survival, the U-boat threat was an existential one. At the beginning of the war, German U-boat doctrine, under the command of Admiral Karl Dönitz, was devastatingly effective. He employed a tactic known as the wolf pack. Instead of individual submarines hunting alone, multiple U-boats would be guided by radio to converge on an Allied convoy. They would then attack en masse, often at night and on the surface, where their low profiles made them incredibly difficult to spot. The early years of the Battle of the Atlantic were a desperate time for the Allies. convoys of merchant ships laden with food, fuel, and war materials were being sent to the bottom of the ocean at an alarming rate. The German Type U-boat was the primary instrument of this destruction. It was a relatively small and simple design, but it was robust and could be produced in large numbers, the perfect tool for Dönitz's strategy. The Allies were locked in a frantic technological race to counter this unseen menace. They developed new methods of detection. ASDIC, an early form of sonar, could ping for submerged submarines, but it had its limitations. High-frequency direction finding, or HUF-DUF, was developed to triangulate the position of a U-boat when it surfaced to transmit radio messages back to its command. Small, agile warships known as corvettes and frigates were mass-produced to serve as convoy escorts. These vessels were equipped with depth charges, powerful explosives designed to detonate at a preset depth, hoping to crush the hull of a nearby submarine. Long-range patrol aircraft, like the consolidated B-24 Liberator, were deployed to hunt U-boats from the air, closing the mid-Atlantic gap where submarines had previously roamed unchallenged. The Germans, in turn, worked tirelessly to improve their submarines. They introduced acoustic homing torpedoes, which would steer themselves towards the sound of a ship's propellers. They developed the snorkel, a retractable tube that allowed a U-boat to run its diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth. This meant they no longer had to surface to recharge their batteries, making them far less vulnerable to detection by radar-equipped aircraft. The pinnacle of German U-boat design came late in the war with the Type Electroboot. This was a revolutionary vessel, the world's first true submarine, designed to operate primarily underwater rather than as a submersible surface ship. Its streamlined hull and massive battery capacity gave it a submerged speed faster than most of the Allied escort ships. It could run silent, deep, and fast. Had the Type WWII been available in large numbers earlier in the war, it might have turned the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic, but, like the Me-262 jet fighter, its development was hampered by bombing and resource shortages. Only a handful ever saw active service, and they arrived too late to alter the strategic situation. The silent war had already been won by Allied codebreakers, aircraft, and escort ships. In the Pacific, the submarine war took on a different character. Here it was the United States Navy's submarine force that went on the offensive against the Japanese Empire. American submarines, like the Gato class, were large, long-range boats, effectively underwater cruisers. They waged a ruthless and incredibly effective campaign against Japanese merchant shipping. This campaign was utterly devastating. Lacking the sophisticated convoy and anti-submarine warfare systems of the Allies, Japan's merchant marine was systematically annihilated. This severed the flow of oil, rubber, and other vital raw materials from its conquered territories back to the home islands. The Japanese war machine was slowly, inexorably starved of the resources it needed to function. The American submarines also played a crucial role as fleet reconnaissance and rescue platforms. They would patrol ahead of the main carrier battle groups, providing early warnings of Japanese fleet movements. They also saved hundreds of downed Allied airmen, plucking them from the sea, often under the very noses of the enemy. This service, known as lifeguard duty, was a massive boost to the morale of carrier pilots. The submarine proved to be one of the most cost-effective weapons of the entire war. A relatively small number of submarines, with crews numbering in the dozens, could inflict damage completely out of proportion to their size and cost. They demonstrated that control of the sea was not just about what happened on the surface, but also about the unseen, deadly struggle that took place in the silent, unforgiving depths below. Of all the technological developments of the Second World War, one stands alone in its sheer, world-altering power. It was a weapon born not in a factory or an armory, but in the minds of theoretical physicists in the abstract world of equations and subatomic particles. It was the culmination of a secret, frantic race to unlock the fundamental forces of the universe and turn them into an instrument of war, the atomic bomb. The story begins in 1938 with the discovery of nuclear fission in Germany. The realization that splitting the atom could release an immense amount of energy sent a ripple of alarm through the scientific community. Exiled physicists, many of whom had fled Nazi persecution, feared that Hitler's Germany might develop an atomic weapon first. This fear was communicated to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in a now famous letter co-signed by Albert Einstein. This warning gave birth to the Manhattan Project. It was an undertaking of unprecedented scale and secrecy, a colossal mobilization of scientific, industrial, and military resources. Across the United States, hidden cities sprang up in the desert of New Mexico, the forests of Tennessee, and the plains of Washington State, all dedicated to a single, terrifying goal. The world's most brilliant minds were gathered together under the direction of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. The scientific and engineering challenges were staggering. The project had to pursue two parallel and incredibly difficult paths to produce the necessary fissile material. One path involved enriching uranium, separating the rare fissile isotope U-235 from the much more common U-238. This was done in vast, city-sized industrial plants at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, using processes of immense complexity. The other path involved creating an entirely new man-made element, plutonium. This was bred inside specially constructed nuclear reactors at Hanford, Washington, and then chemically separated from the irradiated uranium fuel rods. Both methods were fraught with unknowns, and both required technological leaps that had never been attempted before. The project was a gamble on a cosmic scale. While the material was being produced, the scientists at the secret laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, worked on the problem of bomb design. Two distinct types of weapon were developed. The first, a simple gun-type device, would fire one subcritical mass of U-235 into another, creating a supercritical mass and initiating a chain reaction. This design was considered so reliable, it was never tested before use. The second design, required for the more complex plutonium, was an implosion-type device. This involved surrounding a subcritical sphere of plutonium with a carefully shaped arrangement of conventional high explosives. When detonated, these explosives would create a perfectly symmetrical shockwave, compressing the plutonium core to supercritical density and triggering the nuclear detonation. The timing of these explosions had to be precise to within millionths of a second. On July 16, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, the implosion device, codenamed the Gadget, was tested. The Trinity test unleashed a power the world had never before witnessed. A flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, a mushroom cloud rising miles into the sky, and a shockwave that could be felt 100 miles away. Oppenheimer, watching the spectacle, famously recalled a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." With the war in Europe over, but the conflict in the Pacific still raging with brutal intensity, the decision was made to use the new weapon against Japan. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the gun-type uranium bomb, Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, on August 9th, the implosion-type plutonium bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. The effect was cataclysmic. In a single instant, 2 cities were largely obliterated. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly, with many more succumbing to burns and radiation sickness in the days, weeks, and years that followed. The sheer destructive power of a single bomb was beyond anything previously imaginable. It was a new kind of warfare, a new kind of terror. Faced with this unimaginable power and the imminent threat of further atomic attacks, the Japanese government, which had been prepared to fight to the last man, surrendered on August 15, 1945. The Second World War was over. The atomic bomb had not just ended the war, it had fundamentally and irrevocably altered the course of human history. The world had entered the atomic age. The existence of these weapons created a new global reality, a balance of terror that would define the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The fire that had been unleashed from the atom cast a long, dark shadow over the future of humanity, a shadow that we continue to live under to this very day. The technologies forged in the crucible of the Second World War did not vanish when the guns fell silent. They cast long shadows, or perhaps bright lights, that have shaped the very fabric of our modern world. The conflict acted as a colossal, if brutal, accelerator, compressing decades of normal development into just 6 frantic years. The world that emerged in 1945 was, in a technological sense, a different planet from the one that had existed in 1939. The legacy of these innovations is all around us, often in ways we no longer recognize. The jet engine, first seen on the Me 262, now powers the global aviation network that connects our continents. The principles of rocketry, pioneered in the V2 program, took humanity to the moon and sent probes to the farthest reaches of our solar system. The race to crack enemy codes gave birth to the first programmable electronic computers, the ancestors of the device on which you are likely watching this now. Radar, the savior of Britain, now guides ships, tracks weather, and ensures the safety of our crowded skies. Even the darkest of these creations, the atomic bomb, has had a profound and complex legacy. The understanding of nuclear physics it unlocked led to the development of nuclear power, a vital, if controversial, source of energy for many nations. And the stark, terrifying reality of its destructive power has arguably prevented a direct conflict between major world powers for over 75 years. These technologies, born of conflict, have become cornerstones of our peace and prosperity, a constant reminder of the dual nature of human ingenuity.